I am delighted to be back and to have all that behind me. It's a delight to be back and see everyone. I'm going to talk about hegemony, the Holocaust, and other things I spent my sabbatical thinking about. Hegemony and the Holocaust is a project that I've been working on for quite some time, but I put it away to work on some other things, and I took it back off the shelf for my sabbatical to work on it some more. It explains a really very simple question, which is why did more Jewish people survive in some German-occupied countries compared to others during World War II? You would think that this would have something to do with levels of anti-Semitism in the different given countries, that in countries that were anti-Semitic, it would have been easier to find Jews and support them. In countries with a lot of religious toleration, it might be more difficult. It turns out that has very little to do with it. In fact, it has a lot to do with the way that Germany administered the countries in its sphere of influence. Where Germany invaded a country, it often had a choice as to how it was going to administer that country. It could go in directly and remove all the locals from power, impose a very direct form of occupation, and where it did that, it could pretty much implement the policies it wanted as it wanted to. When it ruled through collaborators, however, through high-ranking local officials who stayed in office ostensibly to help the Germans, those collaborators made themselves useful to Germany, and they let Germany know that. So they'd say, look, we've got troops on the Russian front, we're sending you weapons and raw materials. In fact, just by being here, we're putting a local face on the German occupation. You need us almost as much as we need you, and therefore we need some concessions, and those concessions often resulted in more Jews surviving in countries that were subjected to more indirect forms of rule compared to direct forms of rule. Now, the dynamic by which this works, why it is that local collaborating officials would negotiate on behalf of their own Jews instead of something else, better terms of trade, better treatment, something like that. To get an answer to that question, you're going to have to read the book, which you can because it's coming out soon. Thank you to the McLean, McTurnan, and Arnold Research Award for making this possible. In all seriousness, I don't know. I'd still be working on this project if it weren't for that. As much as I was interested in this topic, because the topic is interesting, I was also interested in it for sort of traditional political science reasons. I'm really interested in this question of how it is that a centralized political authority administers its will across its domain, how it is that a central empire implements policy in its various subject states. We tend to think of imperialism as a top-down thing, right? It's the empire, that's why it's good to be the king, right? The empire gets to impose its policies around the realm. What I've shown and what I've seen and what I really think is that junior partners in these relationships, subject states, actually have a surprising amount of say in negotiating the terms of their own subjugation. I'm really interested in that relationship, so more on that later. So how did I start my sabbatical? Well, last summer I started it at Holocaust camp. The Holocaust Educational Foundation runs a 2-week summer workshop at Northwestern University. It was fantastic. It was 2 weeks with Holocaust scholars from all over the world, learning not just about the Holocaust and not just about sort of, say, my book and my research, but about all aspects of it, preparing me to hopefully be able to teach on it if and when I get time. I'd like to do that, and I feel prepared to do that now that I spent time at the HEF Summer Institute. What was it, September, Christine and I co-authored a paper that got published in Giants and Middle East Studies explaining the intensity of the Arab Spring. All over the Arab world there was unrest, there are civil wars that are still going on, but why was that unrest more in some countries compared to others? If you listen to the news media, you would be sure that it had all to do with internet and social media and Facebook and Twitter, and so it would be more unrest in the countries that had more Twitter usage, more Facebook accounts, and so on. It was not. It also had very little to do with population pressure. It had more to do with things like government corruption, economic hardship, that is to say, the same kinds of things that have been causing social unrest forever. But one problem that Christine and I had when we were writing this paper was finding relevant economic data. The data out of the Middle East, especially on economic things, is really unreliable. So we wanted to go to the conference for the International Association of Research on Income and Wealth. Yes, there is such a thing. They had a conference in Cairo, Egypt. and we attended. And it was really good. There were people from the World Bank, there were people from the Ministry of Finance, the Egyptian Ministry of Finance, people from the UN, all with amazing insight on the developments in the Middle East, all with ideas. It still remains very hard, but ideas for finding relevant data on economic development and so on in the Middle East. So we plan to have a follow-up paper on this topic soon. Thanks to the Faculty Development Committee for making that possible, the trip to Egypt and so on. In the meantime, Egypt blew us away. Egypt was so amazing. The scale of the history, right? The scale of the artwork. The pyramids, I realized this when I was there, the pyramids were older to Cleopatra than Cleopatra is to us. That is mind-blowing, right? Like, it is amazing, and it blew us away. The people were amazing. Chris and I got to talk to hundreds of people, literally hundreds of people, about the current situation in Egypt, what they think about the current government, what they think about the Arab Spring. It was surprising, it was revealing, it was moving. I just want to go back, but not in summer, because it is really freaking hot. Those drinks are delicious. That is crushed sugar cane. They just crush it in front of you, little street vendors and so on. Anyway, back to the United States. Well, technically, I went to Miami, which is where I'm from, and that's technically part of the United States. I've long been sort of brewing a project in the back of my mind on the Caribbean, on imperial legacies of the Caribbean. There is a long-standing literature in political science that seeks to see if there's a correlation between economic development in various African countries and the countries that colonized them. Is it the case that countries that were colonized by the British are better off or worse off than countries that were colonized by the French or by the Portuguese or the Belgians or whatever else? That is a fascinating literature, but in my mind, really problematic, because you look at any two African countries, and those two countries are going to be different for all kinds of reasons, not just whichever country it is that colonized it. But more people write about Africa because it's bigger and it's more important than the Caribbean. But from a methodological point of view, I thought the Caribbean was a much better place to test that theory. Here you've got a whole bunch of island countries with really similar climate, really similar natural resources, similar histories, similar economies based on the same kinds of things, tobacco and tourism and offshore banking and drugs and whatever else it is. Like their economies are, so here you have a controlled experiment in a way that you wouldn't in the African case. Here you also have amazing opportunities for research travel. So, I did some preliminary research. I finally got to crunch some data. This is just a snippet. The very first thing I found, kind of dramatic, right? Countries that are independent in the Caribbean, the sovereign countries, are far poorer, dramatically poorer, than countries that are still part, formally or informally, of some greater empire. Now, I don't know if this is because, being sovereign makes you poorer, or if it's because if you're poor, the imperial power doesn't mind so much if you go your own way. Figuring out which way that causal arrow goes, I think itself will be really interesting. But even more interesting, and it's amazing how topics kind of hit you in the most unexpected ways, the most unexpected times. I went down to Miami, to go to Miami, but also that's where I'm from, that's where my parents are, and to talk to people I know down there who study the Caribbean and so on. And I spent a lot of time talking with my parents, like as normal people, not as my parents. And we went to see Selma. And I realized that they grew up in Miami in the 50s and 60s, and so they had this sort of first-hand account of the civil rights movement that I never really sort of connected with them, because, I don't think of South Florida as part of the South. I mean, I think of it as South New York, maybe, right? But I think of it as part of the South. And so the way that the civil rights movement unfolded in Miami and South Florida was very different. But my parents had this amazing experience with it. My mom was a teacher. She started her teaching job in a segregated school. And I didn't really fully know that. And so as we were talking about it more, it sort of occurred to me, and I think the movie reminded me of this as well. I think it reminded a lot of people, that so much of the civil rights movement wasn't really about getting the right policies. It was about getting the right policies implemented. That's to say, on the federal level, a lot of the necessary laws, not all of them, right, but a lot of the necessary laws, Brown versus the Board of Education, right, was in 1954. Most schools were still not segregated or desegregated, 8, 10, 15 years later. And so I started to think that what we really had going on was a situation of a central authority trying to impose its will on a bunch of subject states that may, how do you say this, may not have been so enthusiastic to follow the imperial directives. And so suddenly I thought, wait, I know something about that. And I've done absolutely I've done very little research on this so far, but because it really was something that just hit me at the end of my sabbatical. But this could be an amazing thing. It's true, in fact, that in Florida, the first schools to get desegregated were the ones in South Florida, which makes total sense, especially because South Florida is South Florida, right? And it gave the governor then a great excuse to drag his feet when it came to integrating schools in the north, where people would have minded more. And so there's this fascinating dynamic in Florida, which you don't even think of as a southern state, culturally or something like that, when it comes to civil rights. So I am open to ideas on future. All right, I also attended a department chair's workshop in San Diego. Thank you, Scott. I attended Jane Hardy's linguistics class, which was amazing, like not just the class, but to take a class as like a grown-up. It's amazing to sort of see it from that point of view after you've been on the other side of the room for a while, to go back and not just sit in on it, but to take the exam, to do the homeworks, to get a grade. It was fun. I learned a lot, but actually I learned a lot about teaching, right? I learned a lot about learning because here I was doing it after so long. I ran for city council. Spoiler alert, I didn't win. But I took a few online courses. Really, I don't hear a lot of conversation about MOOCs and these massive online courses and exactly how scared we should be of these things. I hear Fred talking about it a lot. Not too much else. I am now scared. And I'm scared because these courses were amazing. They were really good. And that, I think, makes them kind of a threat, and at least something we should be thinking about in terms of how are we going to respond. What added value do we have as a small liberal arts college that they don't have? I mean, I think we do, but convincing people of that when these courses are that good is much harder than I imagined it would be, and I think we should be thinking about it a lot. I learned how to make cheese, like real cheese, really stinky, veiny cheese that Christy makes me eat 24 hours before she will try it. And I invented a self-draining sump basin, which is much more interesting than it seems. And that's it. I also was really careful to stay on time, and I think I did, so I'm open to questions. Jane,
I just want to say that Ethan was my best student.
I was going to say, does the FERPA apply to Ethan in this situation?
What did you answer?
Yeah, we got any bias, please. So which project should I do? Seriously, I have no idea.
Well, I was just thinking that the Caribbean one has a very different feel than Africa. For one very stupid sounding reason, they're all islands. Right? So hence, a lot of the African, what we call country, is just sort of an arbitrary division that doesn't necessarily reflect anything about what Africa was like before Europeans showed up. Whereas with the islands, they're already in discrete units. Right. And maybe that would make things easier to detangle.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. Like, I mean, I'm joking kind of about the field research opportunity. I mean, I really do think from the methodological point of view, if you're ever going to have a natural experiment where you can control for things, Africa is not the case. You know, so at least to do that kind of study in Africa is always going to be very problematic in a way that I think the Caribbean will not be. Yeah, Lorraine.
I was wondering if you thought about Machiavelli's prince in relationship to the work you're doing in Europe. So he's writing about a ruler thinking about the best ways to take over a new people and to maintain stability and then flip that take over. I was just thinking that might be an interesting.
Yeah, I haven't. No, I should. Let's talk about that later. I don't think about the prince enough in general, I think, so, yeah.
I would encourage you, I would like to encourage you and then to figure out a way that I can go with you to work on the imperial legacies in the Caribbean. I think if you taught a class on that here, that would be awesome, and we could then incorporate it into the Black Studies minor.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I'll entertain that.
You have to take me with you.
Yeah. Yeah, Dave.
It hit me that when you were talking about Europe, that the evil collaborators were protecting the Jews.
Yeah.
In the South, the evil collaborators were maintaining segregation.
Yeah.
I mean, you realize that morality goes all kinds of ways.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not making a moral judgment on the or a moral equivalency between the two processes, right? I'm just suggesting that the dynamic is the same. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm really happy that the policies were hindered in one case, and I'm happy that they were in the other case. I don't, you know, but the dynamic shouldn't differ based on how much we like the policies, whether it's a genocidal policy or a desegregationist one, right? Like, I mean, from the point of view of a central authority implementing that policy on reluctant subject states, I don't know if the dynamic should be any different. I don't know. I guess I'll find out. Right.